Welcome to Wildly Capable with Kate, a podcast made for those looking to unleash their wildest capabilities. I'm your host, Kate Durocher, a dating, relationship, and self-worth coach on a mission to help people build better relationships, starting with the one they have with themselves. In each episode, we'll dig deep, turn inwards, and embark on a transformative journey. Together, we'll break free from unhealthy patterns, rip through self-limiting beliefs, heal past wounds, and build unwavering self-worth, all to create healthier relationships as a result. Get ready to explore the wild, untapped potential within you. Are you ready to see just how wildly capable you are? Subscribe now and join us on this empowering adventure. Remember, your wildest capabilities await. Hi guys, welcome to another episode of Wildly Capable with Kate. Today's episode is going to be a fun one because I am interviewing Danny Goldstein, who is the creator of matchmaking service Crux Compatible, based here where I'm living in Austin, Texas. It's a really fun conversation about how honestly modern dating just isn't working the way that so many of us wish that it was. Whether that be from dating apps or social media or just changing beliefs and societal norms, dating seems to be a struggle for a lot of people, and that's why Danny created Crux. He created it to solve the problems that so many of us are facing when it comes to dating in today's age. Danny is a former corporate lawyer, and after spending 6 years doing corporate law for a tech company, that's when he realized that something was missing. This feeling led to him throwing all of his belongings into a storage unit and heading to South America. During a convo over dinner with friends about the difficulties with modern dating, Danny realized that we need to stop swiping on dating apps and instead focus on factors that matter more for long-term relationships. Danny dove into these factors such as attachment styles and core values, and it was through that important work that he decided to follow his passion to help people find their forever partner, which he says is the crux of most people's happiness. And that's when his matchmaking service was born. I really love my conversation with Danny because I think it gives a new perspective on different options for how you can meet people. And I think that's important for everybody to hear right now. So if you are having no luck with dating apps are not working for you, you want to delete them all the time, but you end up back on them, then this podcast episode was filmed for you. So keep listening. Hi, Danny. Thank you so much for joining Wildly Capable with Kate today. I'm so excited to be chatting with you. We've had a couple conversations and I loved each of them. So I'm excited for everybody else to hear from you too.
Well, thanks. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So to start, how about you just tell us a little bit about yourself? Who is Danny?
Well, I'm a lawyer turned matchmaker. I've been in Austin for about 20 years, and I was a lawyer for about 14 of those years, and most recently in corporate law. And it felt a little soul-sucking, and at the end of 6 years of that chapter, I put all my stuff in storage and headed to South America to travel. And then I realized my passion was matchmaking, and I started this company called Crux Compatible here in Austin.
I love it. Why matchmaking? So I know, I'm a dating coach, so clearly I'm passionate about dating and relationships too, but matchmaking especially is a very unique angle to go with it. So first of all, why do you care about dating? Why do you care about helping people find their person? And then why did you choose matchmaking as the avenue to help people do that?
Absolutely. So I went through a breakup about 1.5 years ago, and one of my oldest friends said to me, "You have a bad picker, dude." And what she meant by that was that because I lean avoidant, I tend to attract anxiously attached women. Attached women are attracted to me. And so I found myself in the same pattern over and over and over again. And I would love to help people break out of that pattern because I realized, wouldn't it be great if somebody chose for me? And around that time, I was listening to a podcast with Logan Ury on the Modern Wisdom podcast, and she was talking exactly about this concept. And she had mentioned that we are not evolutionarily built to choose from thousands of options, nor to choose for ourselves. And so then fast forward a few months later when I was having dinner with friends in Argentina, and we were talking about the problems with dating apps and with current dating culture. And that's where the framework for Crux Compatible came about.
I love it. I love it. Well, Talk about kind of like the problems that we've been experiencing in modern dating that led you to creating Crux. What would you say you saw those main problems as being? What really sparked your interest in saying, we got to try something new here, guys?
Absolutely. Well, I was on the dating apps myself for a number of years, and one of the frustrations was that I was swiping through so many different profiles that wouldn't even come close to aligning with what I was looking for. And so it felt like such a waste of time and energy. And so I thought, wouldn't it be great if there was a way to make it more efficient? The other thing is that there are so many people who are looking for short-term relationships, or they leave their dating profile blank, which I have some theories as to what that
Right.
really means. And so for the people who are dating intentionally for a long-term relationship, it's so difficult for them to efficiently find those people. So I thought, wouldn't it be great if I could create a space where all of the people were looking for long-term relationships and were dating intentionally? So that's one big part of it. The
Okay.
other part is that, like Logan Yuri said, we're not designed to choose from thousands of people. And so it's really difficult for us to be swiping through a bunch of profiles and accurately pick for ourselves. And there's some relationship science. I won't dive too far into the weeds and bore you to death with it. But if you think about the example of, you get a whole batch of profiles in the beginning that are very high quality profiles. And what that does, it creates an anchor. And so then the remaining profiles that you start to swipe through, the people who in a vacuum you might swipe right on normally, you're comparing them to the people that you just saw who were super attractive and, had really great jobs. And so you swipe left on people that you otherwise would be a fit for and might be interested in. And so that's another big problem with the dating apps.
Wow, that makes so much sense. And I would say dating apps are really based. Yes, we have a few prompts. We get to learn a little bit about a person. We can kind of see their preferences. Do they drink? Do they want kids? Do they want marriage? Little things like that. Dating apps have, but predominantly what we're basing our swipe on is a person's appearance. Let's be real. Like that is the main thing. People just swipe super quickly based on what they see. So with matchmaking, what are some of the core things you're looking for in different people to pair them together? Why is it better than just looking at somebody's appearance?
Yeah, so I look at a lot of different factors, attachment style being the foundation of Crux. So I want to make sure that I'm not matching someone who's really avoidant with someone who's really anxious. That might create a lot of chemistry and they might really enjoy spending time together for a couple of months, but then from a long-term perspective, it's going to be a disaster, right? So that's a big thing that I look for. Yeah. And then I also worked backwards when I was thinking about why relationships fail. And so there's been a lot of research on this already. Relationships fail because of money, because of preferences on sex, lifestyle. And so a lot of people don't engage in these conversations in the beginning because they don't know to see if they're aligned on those things. And then it comes out later and that leads to a breakup. And so I tried to gain knowledge about how people feel about these different areas and match them accordingly.
Would you say that a lot of people end up dating based on chemistry over compatibility? Like that's kind of something, it's about the feel, right? It's about, did I feel the spark or the excitement? And then we keep dating based on that. And if we don't have it, we think something's missing or wrong. Would you agree with that? Have you seen that?
Yeah, absolutely. And what's a shame about that is the spark is really a bunch of chemicals happening in our brain during the beginning part of the relationship called the honeymoon period. And so we're flooded with dopamine and oxytocin and norepinephrine. And then the honeymoon period wears off and those chemicals wear off. And if you don't have a foundation, what the Gottmans say is the most important part of a relationship is a deep friendship. If you don't have that, the relationship isn't really going to go the distance. And so I think there's too much emphasis placed on the spark. Now, I'm not going to say that the spark isn't something that you should have at some point, but the spark can grow. And Logan Ury actually talks about her own personal experience with her husband. She had swiped left on him on Tinder, and they went to the same school or something like that. And so he ended up tutoring her in this coding language, and they were spending more time together. And so she became more attracted to him, and that spark started to develop. And so I think that people have this expectation that when they go out on one date, they're going to have this big spark. And if it's not there, they move on to the next person. And I think that that's probably not the way to go.
I could not agree more. I mean, I've done full podcast episodes on this. I coach everybody on this, where yes, you can have a relationship that feels romantic and exciting and the passion can be there. But if the compatibility, if the foundation isn't there, then no matter what, the chemistry is not going to carry you through the hard things. So
Exactly.
I think you have a really great perspective. And the fact that you are bringing that into Crux is so important. So in your matchmaking, do you ask people questions about like their attachment style or different compatibility based questions, or what does that look like?
Yeah, so I actually have a quiz within the compatibility questionnaire that tells me their attachment style. And what I've done is I've created my own spectrum. It's a scoring of on a scale from a level 5 avoidant to a level 5 anxious. Where do you fall on that spectrum? And so that's how I handle the attachment style piece.
I wish I had had that quiz, roughly 10 years ago for every guy that I ever dated and have him fill that out. That would have been fantastic. But
Same.
It's smart. It's extremely smart because you're right. What you said earlier, anxious and avoidant are drawn to each other like a moth on flame. It's crazy because we do really mirror each other's wounds. So what's kind of your threshold for, okay, I'll pair like a 3 with a 3, or does it have to be they're both at a 1? What is kind of the guideline for who you will pair together?
Yeah. So I'm not going to go into the secret sauce too much, but the idea is that, it's interesting. There's a lot of people will score according to the attached book as secure, but they have a lean towards anxious or a lean towards avoidant. And so what I try to do is I have someone who's secure and might lean a little bit anxious, and I'll try to pair them with someone who's secure who might lean slightly avoidant. So that will create a little bit of the spark, but they're both secure, so they should be able to manage that. And then if someone is significantly on one side of the spectrum, so let's say someone who's a level 4 anxious, I might pair them with someone who's secure, who's a level 1 anxious. I'm not even going to touch someone who has avoidant tendencies with that person who's a level 4 or level 5 anxious.
That's wise. That's really smart, because I think the person who's a 4 on the anxious scale with somebody who's a 1 on the secure scale could actually really work very well, because it will help that anxious person heal. Or same thing with an avoidant. If they're with a more secure person, it could help them find a lot of healing through that relationship and just seeing, oh, these behaviors, they don't work. I can't keep doing these things.
Yeah, great point.
Yeah.
And one other thing that I make sure to ask is whether someone has read information about attachment style, if they know their attachment style, if they've gone to a therapist, if that therapy has been helpful, if they're aware of the patterns that they have in their relationships and how they contribute to those patterns. If someone has answered yes to all of those questions, then that indicates to me that I can match them in a certain way on the spectrum. And if they answer no, then I have to be more careful with who I match them with.
Great question. Again, something that I put in one of my dating profiles back when I was single was like, looking for a man who's done therapy. So I'm like, please just have some understanding of who you are and your emotions and how that affects the way you show up in a relationship. Do you find that most people have done things like that, or is it predominantly this is new to them?
I am actually finding that most people who fill out the questionnaire have gone to therapy. Great. Yeah, I think that there is definitely a trend towards doing that. And the stigma is almost completely gone, if not completely gone.
I would agree with that. It used to be such a big deal, especially for our parents' generation, I would say. Like, therapy just was not normal. It was very, like, judged and frowned upon. Maybe that's coming from older generations who were very focused on, like, work, get things done, don't pay attention to your emotions. And today, it's yeah, have goals, try hard, but you're not really going to have a fulfilling life if you're not also taking care of yourself first and foremost. So I think that's really important that that's something you use to vet people and then actually pair them accordingly. That's really a different way of approaching dating. Would you say that that was one of the kind of the gaps that you were seeing in the matchmaking service that you wanted to change?
Absolutely. So there are two things. One, with the dating apps, like you said, you're not really seeing a lot of information that helps you get deeper into who this person is. It's pretty
Mhm.
superficial. And even in the matchmaking world, I've had a couple of friends use matchmakers who do the traditional matchmaking. And the way it works is that there's a contract and it's like $10,000 for 9 matches over the course of 6 months. Yeah. And they seem to focus more on what this person wants.
Mm.
Then they source very attractive people for that person, and then all they're trying to do is get through the contract. I'm not saying that's what all matchmakers are doing, but that is what I have seen. And so those matchmakers are not asking these types of questions to get to the deeper levels of how do I get you in a long-term relationship? Who is going to match best with you? And the fact is, if you're asking people what they want, I think most of us don't really know what we want. And part of that is we don't know what questions to ask.
And with not knowing what we want, do you think that comes from not knowing ourselves, or where does that come from?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, so for example, if you ask someone what their core values are, most people aren't going to know the answer to that.
It's very true. It's very true. I remember I had a dating, relationship, and trauma coach about 2 years ago when I was in a breakup with my fiance. I was trying to figure out what the heck was going on. And she wanted me to write out a list of my 15 top values. And I was like, I mean, I kind of understand what a value is. I get that it's, honesty or trustworthiness. I can kind of understand the basics of it, but I don't fully know even what that means. And then she brought up a list of 200 values for me to go through and explained, like, yes, these are very esoteric. They're different to every person, but here's some things to get you, like, get the spark going so you can understand more of what it looks like. And I remember reading through the list and being like, wow, I would have never in a million years thought of this word, but this is one of my top values. So, for example, my top value ended up being heroism. And I was like, oh, that's interesting, but it makes sense because throughout my life, I have been the protector. I've been the person like taking care of other people around me. So that taught me a lot about myself, considering it was something that was driving me so heavily. So now today I have all of my clients do what I call the 4 core list. And one of the cores that I have them figure out about themselves is their values. And I have them go through that list. And people just are absolutely, you know, they're confused about what a value is, and then they're absolutely shocked at what their values may be. If they go deep with it, if they don't just sit there and say, it's honesty, it's trust, it's the basic things that we all think of, and they really question it with themselves, they learn a ton about themselves. And it sounds like to me, you've done a lot of this work and you've learned about a lot about yourself, and you're now helping other people do the same. What kind of was that journey like for you? Turning inwards, figuring out your own attachment style. Tell me a little bit about your own journey.
Well, it sucked. It's not an easy process. Um, yeah, so I went through a lot of failed relationships, and I did a lot of therapy, and I did couples therapy with previous partners, and so I learned a lot about attachment style and how I contribute to the patterns that I find myself in these relationships. And as a result, I've found who I will be most compatible for and who will be most compatible to me. I think probably the most impactful experience I had was somewhat recently when I was in Peru, and a good friend of mine, with some convincing, told me to do some inner child work. And so I saw her mentor and did a session, and that was one of the best, if not the best, therapy session I ever had, because there's a difference between doing talk therapy and intellectualizing your issues, and it's another thing to feel where those issues are and then try to shift that feeling into something else. And so that was what that experience was. And again, I won't bore you with my childhood trauma, but I realized that there was a lot, my avoidant tendencies come from experiences that I had in my childhood. And so there is a feeling of anxiousness, of pushing away from my partner and trying to protect myself. And that fear that I experienced in that session, they basically put you in a meditation and they have you go back into memories of your childhood. I was feeling that like here in my sternum. And so we explored that. And then she helped me figure out the feeling that I would want to feel in a relationship. And she helped me understand what that word would be, which is surrender. And so she had me feel through, again, imagery, what that feeling of surrender was. And the idea is to change your thought process from firing that neural pathway to fear to shifting it into surrender. And so, hopefully in my next relationship, I can work on transferring that neuro pathway firing to, a feeling of surrender instead of fear.
How do you shift that? How do you move it from fear to surrender? Like, what are the actual steps somebody would take to do that?
Well, I'm not exactly sure, Kate. I'm going to have to be in a relationship to figure that one out. But I think the theory goes that, half the battle is knowing what it feels like. And so if you can hark back to that feeling in the session, and then you can say, oh, I'm starting to feel that fear and it's right here. And I remember what that felt like. And I also remember what it felt like to have that feeling of surrender. So I'm going to consciously shift when I feel that feeling in my sternum to something different. And then I think it's repetition. And so there's this concept of myelin, like the more that you fire a neural pathway, the more myelin wraps around that neural pathway to make that signal faster. And so with repetition, you can eventually learn to have that neural pathway fired instead of being triggered.
That makes sense because that's exactly how I coach people who have an anxious attachment style. I say, when you feel that anxiety coming up and you want to text him a bunch or you want to call over and over, literally do not let yourself divert the energy, sit with the emotion, feel the discomfort, but do not act on it. Mm-hmm. And then that is weakening that neural pathway that's so used to going in that direction and choosing something different, which eventually every time you do it will strengthen that as well. And that will become your new norm. So it sounds like it's the same thing, just kind of in the inverse, basically.
Yeah, I love that.
Really, really cool. So a lot of the women who listen to this podcast and who I coach are anxious. I myself used to identify mostly with an anxious attachment style. So it's fun to be talking to a man who has a more avoidant attachment style, or at least has in the past. Yeah. Tell every woman listening to this what a man who has an avoidant attachment style needs to feel safe so he doesn't retreat. I put you on this. I didn't tell you I was going to ask you this question, but we need to hear it from a man. So tell us your thoughts.
I'll wing it. So I think space and understanding is probably the biggest thing. So in my last partnership, we were in Hawaii, and we were in a complicated situation where we were like broken up, but kind of not. And we were trying to figure out what to do moving forward. And my feeling was that I felt so guilty and scared because I wasn't sure about the relationship and I wasn't sure about her. And I didn't want us to get further down the line and break up with her. And she's invested all this time in me. And so it felt like a lot of pressure. Right. And so I just kept pushing away, as an avoidant does, right? And the best thing that she said to me was, dude, I'm not sure about you either. And that took so much of the pressure off, because it wasn't like she was trying to cling to me and trying to create this intimacy or force me to come together in this intimacy. She was allowing me to do it on my own time and my own terms without the pressure. And so that was such a freeing concept. And I began to trust more and more that, and this was through a lot of therapy following that, I began to trust more and more that if I came to her with a concern or a doubt, that it wouldn't have this explosive outcome, which is what I had been used to in my childhood. So I would just keep things in. And so, again, it's a repetition thing that if, in this case, my partner breaks the cycle and instead creates a supportive, safe place, eventually I start to feel more and more comfortable coming towards her. So it's a process and it takes time and it takes understanding. And I feel for the people who have to deal with the avoidance because it takes a lot of patience.
Well, that is the answer that all of us girls listening to this podcast have been needing. It's just comforting to know it. If there is a time where the guy needs a little bit of space, a little bit of time, it doesn't mean he's leaving necessarily. It just means he has a different way of processing and feeling safe than you do. And he deserves that just as much as we deserve the closeness and the comfort and the reassurance. So it's finding that middle ground. And it sounds like you've done a lot to be able to even understand what that middle ground is and then be able to advocate for your needs while also respecting hers. And I think that's really, really cool.
Well, thanks. Yeah, and I'll add another thing to this, something that the avoidant can do to make that easier on the anxious partner or secure partner is to comfort them when they say that they need space. So as an example, you could say, babe, I love you. This isn't about you. I just need to take a day and do my own thing, and I will come back tomorrow or whatever it is, right? And so, and even in the context of a fight or a discussion, if you start to get flooded and you need a break, it's a good idea to say, hey, hon, I'm starting to get a little flooded. I just need, 30 minutes and we can come back. And it's the explanation that you will come back that is helpful.
Yes, exactly. It's just give me a little bit of an explanation so my mind doesn't start running a million miles a minute, because it's going to, unless I kind of know the game plan and where your head's at. So that's so true. It seems so simple and yet it's so hard, but it's conversations like these that helps people know, hey, there are other tools that you can try that will help you create a stronger foundation in your relationship. Exactly what we've been talking about. It's incredible.
Yeah.
It's great.
And I'm going to add one more thing, if that's okay. This comes straight from Gottman, but he talks about how men and women are different in terms of how quickly they get triggered and how long they stay triggered. And I think that's an important concept for men and women to understand, because men do tend to shut down more for a longer period of time. And so, this goes back to when, like 3,000 years ago, when we're living on the plains and the roles between men and women. So men were the protectors who were supposed to be vigilant about the community. And so if they heard a stick snap in the middle of the night, they needed to become very vigilant very quickly and stay vigilant to make sure some tiger isn't going to attack the community, right? Well, for females, it's the total opposite. Their milk production actually is affected by the chemicals like cortisol. And so that, from an evolutionary perspective, they don't get triggered as quickly, and then they calm down or soothe themselves faster than men do. And so I think it's important when men and women get into an argument or a conflict to understand what's happening internally, like chemically. What is happening is that men do get triggered faster and then they stay triggered for longer. And so I think this understanding might help on both sides, because I think men tend to avoid conflict because they are aware of the discomfort of the feelings and how long it takes them. And so I think a bit of understanding on both sides would be very helpful in those situations, because then men could understand, hey, I'm feeling flooded. Before that happens, I need to take a little break.
I've never heard that explanation, and it makes so much sense. It makes perfect sense. It is still really the role of a man to be the one who pops up with the bat in the middle of the night and takes care of things, right? So it makes perfect sense that back to evolutionary times, like primitive times, that's what was ingrained in a man and a provider. It's a really great perspective. Also extremely helpful, because the next time my partner shuts down, I'm going to be like, he's just here protecting me. It's okay. That helps a ton. For somebody who is very new to these concepts, who doesn't really understand attachment styles, has maybe heard that buzzword, but hasn't gone into it, who doesn't know the types of like science and psychology that you've done a lot of deep diving into, tell us how you did that work to understand these things. Where can somebody start?
Yeah, I think the book Attached is a great place to start. I think that that is a really easy entryway into describing what attachment styles are
Mhm.
and what relationship dynamics are. So that would be my recommendation on a place to start.
I agree. I always say that Attached is my favorite book. And then I follow it by saying maybe it's a little weird that a self help psychology book is my favorite book, but it changed my life. It absolutely helped me understand myself and the men I was attracting 10 times more.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think my second recommendation, once people kind of understand a little bit more about themselves, is Gottman's book, what is it? How to Make a Marriage Work, or like
Yeah,
the 7 principles to make a marriage work, something like
something
that.
like that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So that one gives really good tips for how to navigate a relationship. So things like being influenced by your partner is a huge one, and
Mm.
accepting bids. And I won't go into details on those concepts because we could do a whole podcast episode on just that one book. But that would be the second step, is once you kind of understand your attachment styles and you understand more about yourself, then you can use the tips and tricks from that other book to help you navigate.
Well, it's just tools that we're not taught. We should be taught, how to bid for connection and how to give it to our partner, and attachment styles and conflict management, emotion regulation in school. We should be taught these things from the time we're like in elementary school all the way to when we graduate college. And we're not taught it. So then we all are out here just kind of the blind leading the blind, trying to make sense of things, which is why I think services like Crux are so important, because you're able to step in and say, hey, there's actually a different way we can go about this. And this way will probably be better and help you avoid a lot of pain. So with Crux, with matchmaking, I feel like a lot of people do have a stigma around matchmaking. It goes back to what you were saying with people who use the services. It's kind of this like, it's based on their appearance. It's based on how much money they have. It's based on their career and not anything substantial. So for somebody who is still viewing matchmaking in that old way, where they've been in those sorts of situations where the matchmaking was not what they were hoping for, it didn't work for them, what would you tell them about Crux and how it's different?
Yeah. So first, I dive deep into things that matter for long-term compatibility, and it's based in relationship science. I've stolen a lot from Logan Ury, so and I've modified the questionnaire to include questions as a result. So I think that there's a much higher success rate in something like that. The other piece is that if you're going to walk on a pickleball court or walk into a bar, you still have no idea whether people are looking for a short-term relationship, long-term relationship, who's dating intentionally.
Mhm.
Whereas if you use something like a matchmaking service where the matchmaker is being intentional about creating a pool of people who are dating intentionally, your odds go way up of finding someone who's going to be compatible with you.
How do you know if somebody's dating with intention? How do you figure that out?
Great question. So there are a few steps that I use to find this out. So I have a wait list, and there's a questionnaire that's short for the wait list. And one of the questions is, are you ready for a long-term relationship? I asked that question again in the questionnaire, the compatibility questionnaire. And also the compatibility questionnaire takes about 20 or 30 minutes to fill out. And that's not forever, but it is a commitment to sit down and do it. And so it does weed out people who don't want to take the time to do that. And then I think the last thing that I think is really important is the post-date questionnaire. So when I send two people out on a date, I have them fill out a questionnaire that lets me know, A, do they want to go out again with this person? And then if they say no, I want to find out why. One of those reasons that I want them to report is this person's not actually looking for a long-term relationship. And it's kind of similar to, have you seen those Facebook groups where it's like, don't date this guy, and it's in like
Yeah.
these different
Yes.
cities? Yeah.
Dating, try all of those.
Yeah. So I wanted to build that concept into the service where it's so inefficient going to those Facebook pages and scrolling through. Like, how are you going to find, the red flag
Absolutely.
guy? Right. And so, but if I can bake it into the service, then I can weed out people who either aren't serious or have other issues. And I hope I catch, up front, 99%. But in case I don't, I would love for people to report like, hey, this guy's probably or girl is probably not the best fit for this service.
Have you run into that before?
Yeah, I have. Interestingly enough, I had a guy mention like, "Hey, she's great. I just don't think she's serious about dating intentionally."
Mm. So
And
then
so
what happens from there?
I take her out of the database.
Wow, I love that. I love that. It's like, you know what? If you made somebody uncomfortable or you showed something or whatever it is, I'm not for you. And that's a good thing.
Yeah,
Very
absolutely.
cool. Very cool. So walk me through the process. Somebody wants to work with you, wants to work with Crux. What do they do? And then they fill out the application. And then do you set up the date? Does the guy call and set up the date? Like, kind of how does it work?
Yeah, so after they fill out the application, I accept them. I give them a code to fill out the compatibility questionnaire, and that shoots all the data into an Excel spreadsheet that I look at. And then I make a match and I send them each an email with a picture and a short description about what they're compatible on to see if they want to go out on a date. If they both say yes, then I set up the date for them. I don't hand out contact information. Part of that's for privacy reasons, and part of that because I don't want them to screw it up. Once you start texting with each other, there's a lot that can go wrong, and especially just logistically, it could go wrong. They get tired of trying to find a date to schedule. And so I do all of that, and then I tell them, show up at this place at this time, and they go out on the date, and then they fill out the post-date questionnaire. And then if they both want to go out together, I say, great, you guys are on your own. Like, I would love to hear back just to, because I'm curious, but they're off and running until they come back to me and say, hey, this didn't work out and I'd love another match. And that's also an important distinction, is that I only give one match at a time. I don't give them like 3 to 5 matches to choose from, because again, that creates that problem where you're comparing people, and having too many options is not actually a good thing.
That's a great component to include. It's one person at a time. That builds intentionality. It forces them to slow down. I think that is very wise to add to the service. Definitely a good call. Tell me a little bit about any success stories that you've had or just recent experiences. What I know you can't give details, but tell us all some stories so we can have some hope.
One example that I'm proud of is I had a woman reach out and let me know that she had actually swiped left on the person that I had matched her with. And that when she went out on the date, she actually found that he was much cuter in person, that she was really attracted to him. And I think, again, it's about the dating app showing you a lot of people, and you're making all sorts of comparisons. And it's also just difficult to gauge someone based on a few pictures. And so I was glad that the one match option worked out in that case, because she gave him a shot, and as far as I know, it's still going well. So
Amazing.
yeah.
Well, it's true on dating apps. First of all, men are not good at taking pictures. So you see their dating app profile and it's like, what in the Lord is going on? And then you see him in person and you're like, oh, he's a normal person. This is fantastic. So dating apps just are not a representation of a human being, both in the best ways and the worst ways. So props to her for saying, I'm just going to give it a chance. And then it's actually proving to work. That's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny. I read this. My favorite book is actually Predictably Irrational by Dan Ariely, who's a behavioral economist. Logan Ury actually worked with him, coincidentally enough. Anyway, so he talks about applying some of these behavioral economic principles to dating. And one example was, because we have this tendency to value things based on comparisons, it's like if you create a profile and you have a picture where you're standing with someone who is slightly more attractive than you or slightly tall or whatever, it's going to make you look less less of an option for someone. And I see that all the time, both with men and women. They're posing with friends who are more attractive than them. It's like, you're shooting yourself in the foot. Like, that's not a good idea. He was actually proposing in the book that you do the opposite. I'm not going to be a proponent of this, but find a friend who's slightly less attractive than you, and that bumps up your attractiveness when people are looking.
Honestly, it makes sense. It's smart. Or there's so many people in the picture that don't even know which one is whose
Yeah.
profile it is, you know? So it's so funny. People don't think about these things, but it actually does change the outcome of what somebody perceives you as. Do you think people look at appearance too much in dating, both on dating apps and just in general?
I do. Yeah. I was actually surprised how much height matters these days. And I know that and I'm talking specifically about women for
Right.
men. I knew that it mattered. I just didn't realize to the extent that it does. And I think there's a bit of social conditioning that's happening with that because 6 foot sounds like such a round number. Why not 5'11" or why not 6'1"? Like, why is the threshold 6 foot? And so I think that to the extent that we can front brain ourselves out of this, that would be great because I think we would have so many more quality matches happening if we could remove some of those filters that we put on ourselves. Now, I get it. Like, attraction is important. I'm not saying force anything, but I think that if we expand our net, we'd be surprised at we're actually attracted to more than we think.
Absolutely. And it grows. Like you said at the top of the episode, attraction really does grow when you know somebody's character and heart and personality. It changes so many things. I see so many men and women, but I'm referring to like women specifically since I work with more women who will not get past a guy's height or appearance or he has a big forehead, like all these silly things. And I'm like, really? That could stop you from maybe meeting your husband? You know, we have to get out of our own way a little bit with all of this too.
Yeah, yeah. And so I think that after a first date, if you're not feeling a huge attraction or a spark, but you're at least curious about this person and they make you feel like Logan Ury talks about her post date 8, which is focusing on how does this person make you feel? Because
Yes.
when you're in a relationship with this person over the course of your lifetime, hopefully, you're going to feel that way over the course of your relationship. And so I think that that's a really good metric to decide to go out on a second date and maybe even a third, just to see if that attraction or chemistry can grow a little bit. And so I think people maybe cut out or abandon ship a little bit too quickly.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And if we're being honest, in 20, 30, 40, 50 years, when you guys have 3 kids and you're super busy, you're not even going to be paying attention to his appearance. You're going to need to know his character and if he's going to show up, and that's what's going to matter the most. I harp
Yeah.
on that all the time with people.
Yeah, you're exactly right.
Very much so agree. Okay, Danny, tell me a little bit about how somebody can start working with you, how they can find Crux, where can we find you, how can we get involved, how can we use your matchmaking services?
Yeah, well, you can sign up on the waitlist at cruxcompatible.com. There's also a link on my Instagram. So I started an Instagram. I'm not great in front of a camera, but I'm trying. And so I have an Instagram with content that's, gives dating tips and relationship tips, and you can sign up through there. I also want to mention that Crux is free. I eventually want to figure out how to monetize this because I need to figure out how to make money eventually. I have some thoughts about how I want to do that, and I want to try to avoid doing a pay to play model. Like, again, most matchmakers doing what I do with this white glove service charge $10,000, and that's without any guarantee of a successful relationship coming out of it. And it just doesn't feel right to me. It feels a little icky. So for right now, it's completely free. I just want to create success stories. I want to do this for the purity of it. And I'll try to figure out how to monetize it later. Maybe it'll be if I successfully get you in a long-term relationship or married, maybe there's some fee according to that. Maybe it's, I come up with some sort of product as an aside, who knows? But my point is I don't want there to be any barrier to entry. I want people to try this because I think matchmaking, it's not even on a lot of people's radar. Like, people don't even think about matchmaking as an option in dating. So I want to spread the message that I think that this is going to work, and I want people to try this option out. And so I encourage people to give it a shot.
I think right there, that alone is why somebody should choose Crux over so many other matchmaking services. You're not in this for the money alone. You're in this because you genuinely believe that this model will help people find love. And I think that is beyond beautiful. And I'm so grateful people like you exist to help people with this very confusing process that so many of us are going through. So thank you. Thank you for
Thank
that.
you. Yeah, I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, any last minute thoughts, anything that we didn't touch on that you want to make sure people hear before we end this amazing episode?
No, I think I've covered it all. And reach out if any of your clients, or if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Absolutely. I'm going to be sending so many people your way. I
Thank
really
you.
believe in this service. I believe in you. So thank you a ton for being on Wildly Capable with Kate. Cannot wait for everybody to listen and for your DMs to start flooding and all the, applications to start pouring in. It's going to be incredible.
Thanks, Kate.